Welcome to this special episode of The Switch. My name is Lindsay Otto, Marketing and Communications Specialist at Nonprofit HR, and I am so excited about today's episode, where we will hear from 3 women named to Nonprofit HR's 2024 Social Impact Women to Watch list. Each year during Women's History Month, Nonprofit HR is proud to recognize women across North America who have made significant contributions to nonprofits, associations, foundations, social enterprises, and the communities that they serve. This year, our Social Impact Women to Watch series features panel interviews with the 25 finalists named to this year's list. On today's episode, you will hear Atokatha Ashmond Brew, Managing Director for Marketing and Strategic Communication at Nonprofit HR, chat with Dr. Delisha Tapscott, Senior Director of People and Culture and Interim Co-Executive Director at MADRE, Kimberly Corbin, Chief Administrative and Financial Officer at the Greater Washington Urban League, and Dr. Nicole McKinney, Chief of Organizational Effectiveness and Culture at Upstream USA. They sit down to discuss all things human-centered leadership. I welcome you to share this production in your communities. You can find this recording at nonprofithr.com/The Switch. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the episode.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Switch by Nonprofit HR. I am so very excited about this special series with our 2024 Women to Watch in Social Impact. Thank you again for being here. Congratulations on such a special designation. We are blown away by the work that each of you do every day to serve your community and your organizations, and we're honored to have you on this first-time panel experience. I'd love it if we can start this conversation out with each of you sharing a little bit about yourself and your organization so that our audience of listeners can become more familiar with you.
Thank you. I think I'll kick us off. I'm Dr. Nicole McKinney. I am the Chief of Organizational Effectiveness and Culture with Upstream USA. I've been there for about 5 years. My background is really laden with mental health work and animal and reproductive care, but as an industrial organizational psychologist, it's been really a thrill to be with the organization for contraceptive care.
And I am Kimberly Corbin. I am the Chief Administrative Financial Officer for the Greater Washington Urban League, and so honored to be on this panel with these lovely ladies. You know, I've been at the Greater Washington Urban League for 9 years, making transformation in the Black and Brown communities in the DMV area. One of the things that I think folks don't know about me is that I was a banker before I became a nonprofit. I was in leverage finance, doing leverage buyout with the likes of GE Capital and Bankers Trust and American Capital. And I hung up my shield, in 2011 and shifted to the other side of doing transformation work. And I'm never looking back.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Delisha Tapscott. I am the Interim Co-Executive Director at MADRE. I hold 2 hats. I'm also the Senior Director of People and Culture. I've been with the organization for almost 2 years now. And a little about me, I am a researcher by trade, definitely a practitioner, loving this field of people and culture. I've been in it for probably about 10 years. I've done finance as well, but just excited to be here with the both of you and look forward to all that we'll talk about today.
I think we've got a really good teeing up for our first question, which is around what drew you to your organization's mission and social impact space in general. Kimberly, I think you already kicked us off in that direction, but we'd love to hear more about what led to that decision for you. What was the catalyst there?
I think the first and foremost is that I've been a justice fighter all my life, and the corporate world was just not going to be the long-term or the place where I was going to retire. It didn't hold enough opportunity for me to show up with my whole self and all of the brilliance that God has put into me and poured into me so that I could give to others. So that servant leadership part was just missing. And, when I think about my transition, to the Greater Washington Urban League, it was kind of twofold. One is I have my vice theory, and that is you can't have transformation just by pushing on one end of the vice. You have to push in order to close the gap. Both of the vice have to close. Otherwise, you still have a gap. And so for me, the Urban League represents an organization that understands that and is rooted in that. And that is rooted in advocacy on one side, policy change, and rooted in increasing the capacity of our people to do for themselves on the other side. And I think then the other piece was just finding the right boss, is having a boss that allows me to show up with all that I have to offer and not be intimidated by that is so incredibly important, especially as a woman in leadership.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. All just great points that are, very loud and clear for me, and really appreciate you sharing more on what led you to the social impact space. How about you, Dr. Tapscott or Dr. McKinney?
Yeah, I can sort of piggyback off of a little bit of what Kimberly even shared, especially the part about finding the right boss. I think that is so important, just being a Black woman in nonprofit spaces. I've worked in a lot of different nonprofits over the last 10 plus years. Recently left an organization where we focused on education, and that's my background. My doctoral degree in research is in education, specifically in organizational leadership. So I feel like this was the calling that's always been there, even if I didn't have the vocabulary to do so. And so it was important for me to always attach myself to organizations that aligned with bringing out the voices of marginalized communities, specifically women of color. And that's exactly what MADRE does. We focus on women, girls, and them moving sort of the work forward as the voice and the focal point of what we do here. So I think it just kind of aligns for me.
Dr. McKinney?
For me, as I mentioned earlier, most of my career was in the mental health space. And so for years, decades, I've been really focused on mental health well-being, human rights in general. Obviously, equity, diversity, inclusion is near and dear in my heart. And just wellness as a collective whole for our whole society has really spoken to me. And so when I came across Upstream as an organization, as a nonprofit, its mission to ensure that patients were receiving non-coercive contraceptive care and access really spoke to me in a unique way. And so it allowed me to really delve into the reproductive space of well-being. And it's really been a pleasure to be on that journey, trying to promote healthcare equity, which really is something I'm super passionate about.
Thanks to each of you. What would you say are the driving factors or core aspects of your people management philosophy in the organizations where you serve?
I'll go again first. This is a big one for me, and it's one that took years to learn, especially coming out of the corporate space where performance is profit-driven performance is what you're expected to produce. Whereas on the other side now, it's transformation in people's lives. So the same thing that I look at in terms of applying to the people we serve, I apply to the people that I serve internally. And so for me, it's always know your people and know who they are, know what they're going through, be willing to be flexible in perhaps things like paid time off. You never know when somebody is taking care of a parent or taking care of a sick child. Just being observant of that is so incredibly important in leading people because you've got to know where they are. One of the other things that I really have learned too, and that is create the position for the talent, not the other way around. You will find that we pass over so many great talented folks just because they don't fit that job description. Grab talent, grab all ages, grab all likes, and create the positions around their brilliance, not the other way around. And so I try to do that often. I also try to have listening sessions when I can feel somebody is not in the right position, but they're brilliant. They're right for the organization. So it's important, again, back to that observation of not only what they're going through personally, but also what they're going through in their workspace and being willing to into better positions for themselves. So when they see that you care enough to know who they are, observe their talent, and are willing to be flexible in moving people around to the right positions or create positions for them, they will produce for the company all day long.
Love it. I mean, I've got goosebumps over here. What did you say? Grab all the talent, grab it all. I love it. I'm excited so far. I can't wait to hear what you have to share. Nicole and Delisha, jump right in, please.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been interesting in working with Upstream that I found a little bit different than some of the other nonprofits that I've worked for is that, in fact, one of their core values is to center on the mission. So often in organizations, you have a mission statement, it's plastered on board material, it's on the website, but it's not in the day-to-day conversation. And so I think philosophically, like overarchingly, I would say centering your mission is critical, keeping that present and alive. And then I think there's like 3, in my mind, philosophical must-haves when it comes to engaging a mission-driven talent. I think the first is to onboard well. So onboarding with clarity around the mission and all the gravity aspects and nuances of it, and also a connection to how that role connects and has impact with that mission. So not every role is like center, like this role directly impacts this particular mission. Just making sure that every employee understands how they connect to the mission. I think the second would be to actually focus on retention at the onset, understanding that every step of the way of that employee life cycle matters, from onboarding to offboarding, and being willing and able to appreciate every step of the life cycle for that employee and being willing to listen, like you said, Kimberly, throughout that journey. And then third, I would say leading with no ego, having the emotional intelligence, pick up on all the things you mentioned, Kimberly, also being willing to listen, to pivot, as you mentioned, and to evolve over time. So things change, industries change, your workforce changes, the diversity of your workforce population changes. And so being able to be flexible and to evolve with your employee base is critical to stay informed and engaged so that you can actually engage your folks in towards that mission and impact.
Wow, just love it. You said retention at the onset.
Yeah.
I'm taking notes.
I love the idea around retention. And there's one thing that I've heard and often say, and it's that you're onboarding continuously until you're offboarding. So the onboarding never stops because there's always something to learn. And I think for me as a leader, and specifically like as a millennial leader, a leader under 40, I look at it as an important piece for me to be consistent, to be transparent, and to be authentic, and also to be accountable. And the reason I specifically say authentic is because, one, who wants to wear a mask all day? And I feel like that's like a large part of what folks have experienced is what we've learned. My research was based around identity negotiation of women of color. And that shows up a lot in these environments that we feel like we have to sort of mask. And so I try to be a leader and also promote the idea as being authentic in the workspace, because you spend 8 hours with me. You might as well be yourself as much as possible. And I think that helps with the organizational culture and ultimately who we attract as our talent. So those are kind of the things that I try to sort of hone in on, is to just be consistent, make sure that the communication is transparent when it needs to be, and be accountable enough to fall on the sword when I have to. And I think that's been a helpful point specifically at MADRE.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. If I can repeat my kids, I'd say that you three ate that question. What I took down, I'm taking notes over here, is onboarding. You're onboarding until you're offboarding. I mean, that is incredible. Can you share an example from your experience where your people leadership skills played a pivotal role in driving positive change within the current organization you're in or prior organization?
Like I said at the top of the call, I'm a people leader. That is literally my job all day, every day. Before this, I was a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And so my focus has been on taking organizations who have been around a really long time, who are often still in the startup stages. I think when we think about organizations that have been around for 20 plus years, we're like, oh, you have all your stuff together. You're good. No, you're not. Most of the time when you peel back the layers, you find, oh, there are policy things we need to focus on. How is the culture? What is the undercurrent of what's happening within the organization? And so my focus has always been around exactly something that Kimberly noted earlier, doing those listening tours. That was the first thing I did when I joined MADRE. I literally met with everyone either individually or in a group to be able to figure out, okay, what's the 411? What's happening? What's the real deal of what's going on within the organization, so that we can essentially approach it in a way that is helpful and moves things forward. One of the things we did this year as well was just focus our theme on collective joy and moving forward. There's a lot of stuff that happens within organizations, but how can we care for each other as a collective, especially since the work we do is so impactful, and we need to be able to look into ourselves and lean into each other. And so I think those are some of the things that I sort of look at within our organization.
I think an example that's coming to mind for me just very recently in this last year, similar to some of the comments you've made, those listening tours. In fact, we did a culture listening series specifically in 2023, and they're really critical, but I also have a bias towards action. And so I think a big component of people leadership is really showing your people that you can try to affect change. And so we had collected like a list of pain points over the last couple of years that we were just kind of synthesizing, noodling on, and waiting for the right space to kind of jump forward and make some change happen. And so we took last year to really culminate all of that feedback into a really call to action, if you will, to really revamp our talent strategy. And so we actually partnered with Nonprofit HR to come in and help us do some more listening, but to also really shift us from a compensation philosophy to a broader total rewards philosophy. And in the middle of all of that was the formation of new career pathways. It was new people management policies and procedures, a lot of new compliance enablers, and a variety of things. And, at the end of the year, what felt really great was that we were able to produce for the first time ever total reward statements. And so that allowed us to really show some of the ways that we incentivize our employees beyond that just comp pay. Another really big moment was hiring for the first time also an equity, diversity, inclusion leader to come and lead and create and operationalize an EDI strategy. We call it EDI strategy for the organization. And so we're still in that journey, still have a long way to go. But it was the first time that we really, in my mind, moved truly from some check the boxes to having a dedicated team focused on equity, diversity, inclusion to highlight additional opportunities that we have within the organization. And so it was a year of some unveiling and some new awakenings, I would say, some light bulb moments happened, but it was definitely a step probably in the right direction.
I think for me, and this has been consistent, this is probably my third or fourth nonprofit. And there's two things that hold true in affecting cultural change. Affecting cultural change to me is about creating teams where everybody can bring their full brilliance to the table and work together to do that. And they understand the calling. So for me, there's two things. One is teaching them, and it's probably my answer for other questions that you might have too. And that is always centering the lived experience and the needs of the people that you serve. Don't chase the money, earn the money. If you chase the money instead of earning the money, your strategy will go astray and you will lose relevance and trust with the people that you serve. And the people that you serve is your asset. Impact that you have on the people that you serve is your asset. Do that well. If you serve those people well, the money will come. So don't chase the money. Make sure that the people that you serve and the voice that the people that you serve is the center of every decision that you make. The other piece for me was in particular in this space, we got workforce, we got financial empowerment, we do education, we do youth development, we do housing, we do homeless prevention, we do emergency assistance. So Urban League is across all of the genres of support that our Black and Brown community needs. All these programs, organizations been around. Great Washington Urban League's been around for 85 years. So many of our organizations have been around for decades. So many programs funded by the government have been around for decades. And yet our health and wellness scores are going down, not up. So one of the things that, and I learned this in my previous jobs doing Six Sigma in the banking field, is just keeping asking the why. But if you don't get to the root cause of the why, then you are actually solving a problem that's not going to be for the benefit of the people that you serve. You have to solve the right problem. So for me, it was like, okay, well, if I'm giving you money, if I'm giving you a class, but you still aren't doing better, what's the point? And I would go to Dr. McKinney. It's therapy. People experience trauma from structural racism, from structural bigotry, and all of the isms. Think about the world that we live in as Black and Brown people and what we have to experience and what we've experienced over 400 to 500 years. It's in our DNA. Trauma is in our DNA. You're not starting with liberating the mind and the soul from that trauma. There is no such thing as learning the class and getting $1 and somehow becoming self-propelled for my full brilliance. No, my mind needs to be liberated. My heart, my soul needs to be liberated from all the freaking trauma that my family and all my ancestors have. So we start everything now with therapy, not just trauma therapy, everything therapy. Financial empowerment, we start with a financial therapist. Workforce, we start with a workforce therapist. We're about to do entrepreneurship. So think about what entrepreneurs, Black-owned companies have to go through just to make $1. It's trauma. My favorite song for this is, Free Your Mind, and the rest will follow. And that I infused after listening to our people and their lived experience. And now it's been adopted as part of our culture.
Listen, Kimberly, I'm over here rocking back and forth, okay? You hit on so many important points, and one of them that was coming through for me has to do with well-being. And it has to do with the tireless work of social impact organizations. I believe that social impact organizations do the work that big corporate and also that government can, and many times they won't do the work the social impact sector organizations do. They are right there filling in so many essential gaps for society across the world, not just in the States, and meeting people exactly where they are and trying to bridge that gap to get to where they need to be. with limited resources, limited staff, and so many other hurdles to jump over. My question for you all is, how do you balance the needs and well-being of your team members alongside the objectives and goals of your nonprofit, which I'm sure is up to really, really big things?
For me specifically, I go back to like leading with authenticity. And I keep bringing that up because it's something that I did not do for the large part of my career and growing up. And when I learned from my parents of like how you have to be and who you have to be in organizations. And so it's like at the forefront of my mind in whatever I do now. And I think that I center authenticity and transparency in saying today is not the day. I'm not feeling my best today. And me saying that to you as a leader is me being vulnerable in that way and me being trusting that you will see me as human, because I think sometimes people forget that leaders are in fact human and show up with a bunch of baggage of their own that they are carrying into these Zoom screens from 9 to 5 and whatever else we do after hours. And so for me, centering collective care and joy in this year, and us starting out with a very like a long letter to our staff, like, look, we know that there's been some things over the last few years, but here's what we're going to try to move forward to. I want to check in on you. I want to drop you that line and say, hey, how are you today? How are you feeling? What does it look like for you? Where's your mood like today? Let's start off our staff meetings with a connection question, a connection experience where you're being forced to talk to each other, but in a way that settles your mood and sort of hopefully changes that 4 that you gave me at the top of that call to maybe a 7 by the time you leave. And I think continuously having that at the forefront and making sure that is aligned with things like we just tried on No Meeting Friday, having no meetings and shutting down so that folks can refocus, allowing folks to have their own autonomy. And so honoring that they're adults and you give them a deadline and they can make that and they can tell you when they can't and we can restructure that. So being flexible and allowing them to craft their time, allowing them to take that time off. I tell my specific team all the time, girl, take Friday off. I've seen you push these emails out. Friday at 2, shut it down. It's okay. We'll be back at it at Monday, because after 2 o'clock, I wholeheartedly believe your brain is not working to be able to push out some of the things and you need to take a step back. So I think there's a lot of different things we're incorporating within my current organization that I've not seen in previous organizations. And I'm really excited to continue on that journey.
I appreciate you sharing all of those things and lifting them up. Just for additional context for our audience, why is that so very important for MADRE?
Specifically for MADRE, I think because we work in international affairs. So you know what's going on in the world, specifically with Palestine. We send a lot of our grants and things to support that area because there's so much turmoil. The work that we do is so much embedded in our heart space. And while I am internal to the organization, that's my job. My job is to take care of their heart spaces because they use their heart space to take care of others. They are not poured into. If the environment is toxic, then they can't pour it into others effectively, and thus they are just losing it at the seams. And so that is why, for me, if I were to explain it, that's why it's so important for MADRE to continue on this path so that we can continue to do the great work that we do for others.
Yeah, I can double down very briefly on that, Delisha. Authentic leadership is really essential. I've learned those hard lessons along the way myself. When you're authentic, it really empowers others to be authentic. And it creates like that dual space and grace for people to show up real, for people to actually be productive when they can bring their true selves to work. So I just have to double down on that and amplify. It's so critical to psychological safety and retention.
And in that same vein, just as I was interested in why that's so very essential for MADRE, can you share a little about why that's so essential, what you're sharing for Upstream and your workforce?
It's, when you are working for an organization that's supporting patients and individuals out in the field, out in the real world, self-care is critical. It kind of goes back to that old cliche on the airplane, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first. And that applies to work in this space. Another reason why I was kind of called into Upstream was I didn't know, living here in North Carolina, that the history of eugenics, forced sterilization, was not that long ago. And as a Black woman who actually, as I entered into this field, and then reflected upon my own medical experience, I was like, wow, I experienced that. Oh, that was biased. Oh, I didn't get the right care then. I was clueless as an educated woman with sometimes not so great insurance and then other times the best insurance. I was the victim of biased care and coercion. To think about a history of forced sterilization only a few years ago is pretty sad. And so, when we think about mission-oriented employees at Upstream, they carry a weight that comes with that history and that comes with a passion to want to have a legacy to really have impact and change that narrative for the future. So it's critical.
Thank you so much. Did you want to weigh in on that, Kimberly?
I just wanted to say that empathy and love will allow you to do what's right by your people, along with the authenticity. When I thought about this award, I don't go for awards kind of thing, but when I thought about my peers or my team, my staff, my colleague nominated me, even though they know all of my imperfections as a leader, and they still nominated. It is affirming, it's invigorating, keeps me moving. And so I owe them to work as hard as they do. They never see me work less than them. And they always see me being flexible. And there's a couple of things that we did recently to just make sure that we're honoring the self-care people need, and that is we give them flexible PTO. It's not necessarily in some policy. Everybody's got, hey, these are the days you get off. You get 3 weeks of da-da-da-da. But if one of our team members comes to us and says, I got to go someplace to take care of somebody, we don't count it. Just go. Because I know that folks are putting in probably way more hours than what they're getting paid for. The other thing that we did is we have an emergency fund for our staff. So just like the people that we serve experience life and they experience hardships, so do our staff. Why shouldn't the services that we provide the community also be available to the people who are putting those services out there? We, have ways in which we allow our staff to get through tough times, which with the flexible PTO and that channel of emergency funds, it allows them to be a little less stressed.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that in all of your responses, I heard hints of inclusion and equity and diversity. And so my next question is around the strategies or approaches you employ to foster a culture of inclusivity and belonging at all levels of your organization. Feel free to jump in here on this question.
One of the things, given that we just kind of launched a new business unit with equity, diversity, and inclusion being focused, one of the first things that we tried to leverage was an online virtual platform where employees could submit concerns, challenges, but also solutions into a portal. And there was a little bit of controversy on whether we should have anonymity or not. I'm a believer creating space for both is critical, unless you're in a perfect EDI world, which we know we never really get there because you're always on that EDI journey. That was just illuminating because it really served as a way to engage employees in a different way. And so we saw the volume of entries really uptick. We saw some themes come through, rang the bell on a couple of things that we needed to pay attention to. And so creating space for employees to really have a true, honest, authentic voice, even if it's the thing that leaders don't want to hear, is essential. The question is, now what? So what do you do with that when you have it? And so it's really a dance that you do with really trying to work across the whole organization to get everyone locked into actually listening, hearing, and then doing something about it. So that was one of the biggest things that we did, was really just creating that channel along with listening tours. We also formed a cultural council. So it's a cross-functional group of employees across the org, all different levels, lots of diversity. And we use them as an advisory box for our leadership team. They also are instrumental in how we recognize our employees for award. And so that's been really helpful because we now have a dedicated strategic advisory soundboard that we can go to when there's a question that's kind of like looming around, something that's caught our attention that we really need to get some feedback on. We know that we can go to them and kind of get that intel or that feedback to help us move forward with whatever the topic is. So that's been helpful for us.
She hit the nail on the head. If you're not engaging with them across everything and allowing them to give you feedback, both on how they feel about the culture, as well as how they feel about the program design and how we interact, that's one thing that is a must. I think the other thing for me is that DEI is nothing without the J. There's no justice when the DEI rules are broken and toxicity is allowed to creep in for, people's unconscious bias. I got plenty of bullseyes on my back as a leader because I make sure that justice is a part of that discussion.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think we started the call off. I think it was Delisha who mentioned at all levels and all ages. And so I have a question regarding how you all ensure that your leadership style remains adaptive and responsive to the evolving needs and challenges within your nonprofit and, of course, the external communities that you serve, all of your stakeholders. Any thoughts there?
I lean into that. I don't know everything, and I do that with purpose. I can only assess a situation based on my perspective, based on my lens. And so it's important, like Kimberly and Nicole sort of mentioned, to bring in those stakeholders into decision making so that I can understand, even if I'm the one with my, with the senior leadership team making the decision, I have to be able to bring in all the voices that don't get a chance to sit in that space. And I think sometimes as leaders, what I've seen along the way is that we lose sight of the fact that we are only leaders because someone trusts us enough to allow us to support and guide them. Because without them, what would we be leading? And so I think that they have to be brought in at every step of the way and consulted as much as possible, even if we don't all like the answer that is, or the outcome that ends up happening. It's still important and impactful. And sort of just to piggyback on like the previous question, some of the things we do in addition to sort of listening tours, we've incorporated 360 feedback within our performance management reviews. We've come up with a understanding of how to incorporate restorative justice when trust is broken, because restorative justice is usually only seen in the criminal lens and in that field of work, but there's a way to incorporate that into accountability. And in these nonprofit organizations, we do leadership assessments. We're doing one right now of our senior leadership team because we're all fairly new. And so those are the ways in which you move from, it's great to have a wonderful sort of, ours is called an EJT, an equity and justice team. It's great to have that. I've been a part of one. I've led them for other organizations. But I think even in that, there's some roadblocks that end up happening. And so you have to be able to move to action by actually showcasing, we have this council, here's how we're doing it in practice.
Really loving everything that I'm hearing on this call. And I wish we had more time. I really do, because you all have just spoke to so many different things internally and externally that impact our people in organizations. And I love what you shared, Kimberly, on taking care of the heart, right? And taking care of the head, what's happening, because you just really can't impact change for your people unless you address what's occurring with them. And I just appreciate so much that you all offered. There are so many women who won't make it to a Women to Watch list. They are laboring in the vineyard, but perhaps their name just doesn't get lifted up and submitted to a contest such as the one that we publish every year. My last question for each of you is, what advice would you give to aspiring women leaders in the nonprofit sector who aim to cultivate a people-focused leadership style that won't get them on a list like Women to Watch, not doing it just for that, doing it because it will do exactly what all of you have lifted up on this call, impact people in a very deep and meaningful and personal way?
I'm going to just go back to one of the answers, and that is when you center the causes and the needs and the lived experience of the people that you serve, you will never make bad decisions. Sometimes it's bad timing, but not necessarily a bad decision. And for yourself as a leader, you got to do quarterly self-check-ins. Self-reflective check-in, and you have to find your group of people who are going to tell you the truth about you and how you impact other people with your behavior and with your leadership style. If you are blind to how your leadership style impacts other folks, you could end up shutting down a channel for your brilliance to shine. So be willing to have a person in the office that will tell you the truth, and surround yourself with coaches, therapists who will also tell you the truth, but also help you work through your insecurities, because you're going to have them. Do not beat yourself up for your insecurities. We all have them. Please, please, please do not beat yourself up. It doesn't help anybody else. Just go get therapy.
Yeah, that was so good. I'm jumping in like, I don't know what to say after that. But I will say, understanding your own personal journey, career journey, your own leadership journey is really key, so that you're not making the same mistakes that maybe others have made, and that you're truly learning from your own history and your own experiences. I think sometimes that reflection is really helpful, and there's no wrong door into how you grow and learn. And I love, Kimberly, what you said about, surrounding yourself by folks who can tell you the truth. And I would say, even taking it one step further, is continuing to diversify your circle, both professionally and personally, because you'll get a mix from the two. And so just keeping a diverse mix around you and staying authentic. Delisha, I'm still in that all day long. You have to stay authentic.
I love it. Authenticity is key. I think for me, I'm a people leader. So my job is to pour into people. And so I think about this a little differently. And I would say go into leadership understanding who you want to be and understanding who you don't want to be. And then I think also making sure you establish your own boundaries, because oftentimes, specifically from my experience in my lens as a Black woman women in leadership, I didn't have a lot of people to look left or right to. I'm the first generation in terms of college, first generation in terms of leadership. And so there wasn't a lot of people for me to look left or right and figure out the answers. And so I 100% agree with diversifying your circle and making sure that you have one, but also making space for your own development, because you are always learning. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have imposter syndrome. You're going to have days where you question yourself. And so you have to go into it with an understanding that it's going to be okay. And it is important for you to be here. You belong here, and nobody can tell you differently. So be yourself. Go into that interview that you have to become a leader. Say, hey, this is me. Take it or leave it. And don't change. I could go on and on all day.
And we can listen all day. We really could. One thing I know for sure from interviewing people is that there's always thought left unsaid. And I want to leave just one moment for each of you to share any final thoughts you have with our audience, which again, it crosses the full spectrum of the sector in terms of mission types, organization type, size of organization, revenue generation, capacity for organization. It really does a major cross section. So people are listening for different reasons. Some are listening because they already know you all. Some are listening because they're interested in your journeys or need a word of inspiration. Whatever they have come to this recording to hear, I'm sure they will find it. But I'd love to make sure that you all have a moment to share any final thoughts before we conclude.
This one and I'm working on it, and that is show yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up. But in the process, don't beat other people up either. African-American women, women of color, we go through a lot. Don't be that other Black woman, that other woman of color that criticizes that other one that's sitting across the table, and there's only two. If you need to pull them aside to have that conversation, do so. If you need to form a little club so that you can pull the sisters together, do that. We experience enough self-doubt, enough hatred, and from people's unconscious bias. The one thing that is really, really, really harmful to us is when we beat us. Don't be that person.
For me, as a Black woman leader, in order to be a truly effective people leader, you have to be a really effective self leader. For me, that means being empowered and empowering others to stand in their truth and to have courage. And courage has to play out in a lot of different ways. But earlier when we spoke about justice, that really stood out for me. That is the one piece that we're missing with the equity, diversity, and inclusion acronym that we use. And to me, the justice is the most important. And so in order to really activate justice, you have to have a lot of courage. And that's not easy, but that would be the thing that I would say when you're doubtful, when you're scared, have that inner strength. And so just trusting yourself and really come forward with the courage to do what you know is right and stand ethical in whatever that particular thing might be.
I'll just end with sort of going in naked. There's a piece of a quote from Nikki Giovanni, and she essentially talks about going in and doing things that we're uncertain about. We don't know what's going to happen, and we're too afraid to go in naked, go in all the way. And that's what needs to happen when you are engaging specifically in people leadership work. You don't know what the days are going to look like. So I would implore folks to go in as free as they can be, centering love, centering their own needs, centering their own boundaries, but also just making sure that they understand that self-care is collective care. And that kind of goes back to the theme that we've been talking about all years, how collective care is so important. But I can't take care of you if I don't take care of me. And so that means that we have to take care of each other in that way. So that's what I would share.
Thank you so much, Kimberly Corbin, Greater Washington Urban League, Delisha Tapscott, MADRE, and Nicole McKinney, Upstream. It has been my absolute pleasure to interview you three. Again, congratulations for being on the 2024 Women to Watch list for social impact, and we'll see you on the next episode.
That's our show for today. This panel of women shared such incredible wisdom about cultivating and fostering a human-centered leadership approach. I might just go back and listen to it a few more times. Their commitment to their people is bursting at the seams in this episode, and I hope you gleaned some tangible things from the insights that they shared that you can take back to your workplace to help center your people in every decision that you make as a leader at any level in your organization. It's worth noting that each panelist comes from an organization with a different mission type, yet this conversation conversation highlights the unity within the social sector when it comes to people management. When we lean into caring for each other as a collective, those who are at the heart of our missions are empowered to drive transformative change and propel the entire sector forward. Now that you've heard a snippet of their stories, I also encourage you to learn more about each of their incredible missions. Be sure to check out the show notes with all of that information. Thank you for listening to The Switch. If you're looking for more episodes, visit nonprofithr.com/The Switch, where you can access recordings and resources to help your organization maximize its greatest asset, your people.